Major funding provided by the Arkansas Humanities Council and the Moving Image Trust Fund.
Ladies and gentlemen, including the people like myself, we want to thank you for coming to the Dreamland Ballroom. We want you to come back tonight, tomorrow night, and from now on, we want to have fun here at the Dreamland Ballroom, here in the lowlands. Thank you.
People would come from miles around to come to 9th Street just to see what it was like.
I'm saying this was the mecca of entertainment in the South.
I want to blow the roof off of this sucker.
We thought we was on top of the world, man. You couldn't tell us nothing.
It was home. It was everything you would wish for.
I mean, all the top bands came through here.
They would come here. This was the place to come, was 9th Street.
I want you to rock me, baby.
This is something that belongs to us. This is our place.
It was a wide open community. Some said too wide open.
I want you to rock me any day.
They did what they wanted to do to destroy a black community.
9th Street became nothing. No buildings on it. All the businesses were gone.
I can't see that there isn't some intent when it happened everywhere.
Oh, yeah!
When I first bought this building, I just fell in love with the building. I just fell in love with the architecture. It just looked like a grand old building that'd be a wonderful place to put a flag business in. Flags are very, very emotional products. When 9/11 happened, everybody wanted a flag, and they wanted it that day. Who goes and gets in the flag business? I got in the flag business from a series of bad luck. How I ended up here is beyond me, and how I'm so successful at it when most flag dealers are not. And how I ended up saving this building without even knowing the history of this building. When I first started looking at it, I never even dreamed that I would ever have a reason to buy it or a way to buy it, but it just called to me. And I just ended up coming into this broken down old building that was abandoned. And then when the old timers would come by to visit me to see who that lady was that had restored the Taborian Hall, I would spend time with them and write down their notes and talk to them. And that's when I began to find the history of the building. And I began to really realize that I had been entrusted with something more than just saving an old building, but also with, carrying the story, the oral histories on.
To understand the whole story, you have to understand the birth of this street. This was an African-American community. West 9th Street was for 100 years. This was the heart of not only Little Rock's African-American community, this was the capital city, I guess you could say, of the African-American communities in Arkansas. This was a community that was born out of emancipation. This area was originally a federal encampment where emancipated slaves came. They flocked here.
The Union Army occupied Little Rock on September 10th, 1863. And when that happened, thousands of blacks started to pour into Little Rock.
In fact, a lot of Southern plantation owners were so mad, they loaded up their slaves and they just drove them to Little Rock in their wagons and dumped them off. And they might have a little bundle of maybe some food and maybe a few belongings, but that's it.
They're liberating themselves. They're liberating themselves with their feet. They know Union troops are nearby. They know slavery never worked for them, so they're going to these places where they can begin to make sense out of life and to begin to live life as freed people.
The U.S. military commanders were sort of overwhelmed. They didn't really know what to do. Suddenly, they had to provide housing and care for all these, at the time they were referred to as refugees.
They created a temporary little shanty town, and it consisted of tents and shacks, and this is where they put the former slaves.
Blissville basically became the core for the early Black commercial district. It was established really just west of where Mount Holly Cemetery is, right in close proximity to 9th Street. Something new was happening in Arkansas in terms of just societal change.
The Republicans gained control, passed a new constitution, which meant that African Americans now, for the first time, African American males, of course, would be able to vote. Comes as a surprise to a lot of people, but there were 20 African Americans in the Arkansas legislature. 16 of them were in the House, and there were 4 senators. Of course, we've never had that many African Americans in the Arkansas legislature since then.
For the first time in the history of Arkansas, we had a new kind of type of African American living here, a Black urban middle class.
You know, you're talking about people who understand very well that they have to be self-sufficient, that they have to be self-contained. We're also talking about people who are very intelligent. They understand well the times in which they live and the things that they need to do in order to survive. And also, when we're talking about people who may have been formerly enslaved, that doesn't mean everybody was in the field picking cotton. Some of these people had skills.
The 1870s and 1880s, businesses were being established, especially from Broadway, which was kind of anchored the east end of the West 9th Street business district, all the way down to Ringo Street. And in that kind of 6-block area, majority were operated by African Americans. By 1890, actually 1/6 of the white population of Little Rock was foreign born. Over half of the people living in the city of Little Rock had been born in northern states. And I think this in itself was important insofar as race relations were concerned, because it did mean you had a more cosmopolitan racial mix.
A lot of people left other areas of the South to come to Arkansas and to places like Little Rock because they did think it was more progressive and more moderate. I think they understand that they have to deal with racism, but not to the extent maybe they'd have to in Mississippi or Alabama.
Little Rock was considered for a time to be more tolerant of the races. Over time, that will change. When former Confederates were pardoned, they quickly swept all of the different elections, almost all of the positions of authority in the South. And so they gained control of the South again. They couldn't take away their freedom that was given with the 13th Amendment, but they could circumvent. Jim Crow laws made that pretty apparent.
Say, I have an idea.
Yes.
You be around here about a half hour before the show.
You mean you're gonna let me watch up close?
Jim Crow, you'll practically be right on the stage. Woo!
Jim Crow was a minstrel character that was performed by a guy named Thomas Daddy Rice. And this caricature came around, I think, in about the 1830s, somewhere in there.
Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow.
And minstrel characters, these are people who would perform in blackface, and they would perform in ways that stereotyped and stigmatized African Americans. Later on, the term was co-opted to mean racial segregation. It meant that increasingly the Black community found itself isolated, found itself being increasingly controlled.
And once the state had established its official cachet of authority to this practice of separating the races, Then the practice started to spread much more in the private sector as well.
It was very costly. There had to be a black hospital and a white hospital. There had to be a black cemetery and a white cemetery.
A lot of things that are necessary to grow an economy and grow a community were not really available to black people at that time, just post-Reconstruction. And the way that it was provided by was the formation of fraternal organizations.
They existed because black people couldn't expect to be admitted into predominantly white fraternal organizations. And so what's happening on 9th Street is happening in black communities all over the country. They're forming mutual aid kinds of societies to help each other out in difficult times.
The Knights and Daughters of Tabor, that is one of many fraternal organizations that we had in Arkansas. It is a national and eventually an international organization, just like the Mosaic Templars.
The official name of the Taborians was the Order of the 12, the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. They were founded in 1872 by the Reverend Moses Dixon. He was a minister of African Methodist Episcopal Church. He died in 1901. His successor was Scipio Jordan.
Scipio Africanus Jordan was a mail carrier here in Little Rock. He was an exemplary leader of the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. Very progressive man. He's the one that spearheaded organizing and getting this building built. This was the grand temple and tabernacle of the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. It was black built and paid for with contributions from Arkansans, from chapters all over Arkansas. And it wasn't cheap. It was $65,000 when that was a lot of money. The late teens and early 20s, this was a golden era for African American development. You know, they even had the label in Little Rock, the prosperous race. They were doing really well.
There were every kind of business imaginable was operating. You had confectioners, you would have barber shops, you would have stable yards. You name it, almost any kind of business you can imagine would be operating here along West 9th Street.
And all the local people called it the line because the line was the boundary between black and white societies in Little Rock.
We have been ruled by race in Arkansas. Whites sought to dominate and control African Americans through really a retelling of our history in a way that justified and rationalized white supremacy.
Then increasingly, as we get up to the World War I years, there are African Americans who are questioning, what is democracy? What does all of this mean? Should African Americans stand behind the war effort? Should African Americans go fight overseas? You know, how are you going to ask people to go abroad and fight for that cause when it's not happening here in the United States? But a lot of African Americans do go serve.
After the First World War, African Americans came back to Arkansas expecting there to be some changes in the way they were treated.
We see the rise of the KKK in Arkansas that had reinvented itself as being moral Protestants that are upholding family values.
Racial tensions are at an all-time high at this point because people are emboldened. They're saying, I have fought for this nation. Now, will this nation be all that it says it is. And again, some people are saying, well, I don't care what you fought for, and I don't care what this nation is supposed to be. You're Black. You're at the bottom of the racial hierarchy. One of the ways they reinforce that is by killing people.
In 1927, in May, there was this child named Floella McDonald. Her body was found in the bell tower of the First Presbyterian Church. Eventually, Lonnie Dixon was charged with the murder. He was able to be gotten out of Little Rock in the rumble seat of a Studebaker and sent thousands of people into just a frenzy. The people in Little Rock needed to find somebody to take revenge on. What happened to John Carter was that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was alleged to have attacked 2 white women.
A white posse chased down Carter. They found him in the woods.
So they beat him, and they beat him, and they beat him.
Strung him up and forced him to jump off a car.
They hung his body from a telephone pole, used his body as target practice.
Tied him behind a truck and drug him down from Broadway to Chester and back.
The very center of Black life in Little Rock.
There used to sit a big, beautiful church. The church was called Bethel. They broke into Bethel and got some pews, and they built this big barn fire in the middle of 9th Street. Then they took John Carter's body, placed it in the fire.
At one point, somebody dragged his arm off and directed traffic with it that night. The amount of intimidation that this caused in the African American community was enormous, and we still don't know how many African Americans left Little Rock as a result of what happened that night in 1927.
You know, our label of being tolerant kind of went away by that period of time, yeah.
See right here? Chatty Choo right here. Chatty Choo right here. See that? It's a building right there. See it? Right in that front door, they tore it down. Chatty Choo. Miller, I want to take it's a funeral home right here, Miller's. See that sign right there? Miller's funeral home right here. That would get to the Twin City Club down there. See them steps down there, that place there, and go around there to see that. Go downstairs and go to Twin City Club down there, the basement. I run Twin City. It's a club, nightclub. Drink beer and dance. Pawn shop right here, Block Pawn Shop. Got it? Block Pawn Shop right here. Got it? Then Crenshaw Tailor Shop right here. Yeah, all black people working in that, yeah. Walking and talking, shooting pool, liquor stores, drinking, they were gambling, doing everything. Don't look like 9th Street now. Cause had bills all that side. Couldn't get down there on Saturday. People's like this in. People's like ain'ts down here. West Night Cab comes over there. Right there, West Night Cab. Yeah, church right there. Church, yeah, that's right. GM3 right there. Yeah, GM3 was right there. Red's Pool Hall right here. Yeah, right, yeah. Red's Pool Hall. Yeah, we chased the women. All men did. Women come down there. Well, a good time. Yeah, had our own business, everything. I don't know. All the time we know it tore everything down here. Children's drugstore right there. Yeah, right here. Children's drugstore right here. Got it? Come here and talk all the time. We can sit on the corner and talk. Drink a little Coca-Cola, a little beer together. Shoot pool. Well, it would be nice to talk at the town, used to be. That's the only place black folks could go at that time. Go back, I wish them days come back to me. Had a good time. We got along down here, a good time. Had somewhere to go. We ain't got somewhere to go now.
Only a few years ago, we were a discouraged people because we were the first to lose our jobs when Old Man Depression came along and the last to get them back. We struggled vainly to regain our bearings while depression, fear, and failure stalked the nation.
In the 1930s, things were not looking that good for West 9th Street.
The Great Depression really impacted African Americans on the line. As a matter of fact, it impacted every single fraternal organization, and we're going to see them close the doors of a lot of their businesses. The Knights and Daughters of Tabor are going to lose this building because of the Great Depression. So what we see is a reorganization of West 9th Street.
When that happened, the kind of center of life, though, moved down the street to the Dreamland Ballroom.
When Dreamland became Dreamland is unclear. But we do know in 1933, it already had a name. They were already making a little heart-shaped invitation with a modernistic club, the Dreamland Ballroom. And then in 1936, the Chicago Defender newspaper starts writing about the Dreamland Ballroom and how it's going to be this music epicenter for all of these musical acts that are coming through Little Rock.
In the United States of America, it appeared that music was a true freedom for the Negro race of people.
We're soul people. We got soul within our soul.
You'd hear the music playing, just light your soul right up.
The Dreamland Ballroom was one of the most beautiful venues for these dances and for these performances in the South. Everybody talked about it.
You could dress real nice, you could just go and relax, enjoy life. It was beautiful down here on a hot summer night.
They was out there cutting rugs.
People would have on their finest threads in the world.
Looking good from head to toe. And they would come out and they would party all night long.
We were jitterbugging. We weren't doing Charleston now. Charleston was out, that was old.
One of the best promoters was S.W. Tucker, and he's gonna hold a lease on this place for a long, long period of time. And he kind of set the stage to bring those big acts to the Dreamland Ballroom. After they finished playing at the Robinson Auditorium, they were coming down to the line, because this is the only place they could come.
They would do that gig, and then after that, they come to the ballroom for the real party.
And musicians are notorious about playing until the sun came up.
Every week, there was some named entertainer at the Dreamland Ballroom. You name it, I've seen it. Lil Green, Tiny Bradshaw, Duke Ellington, Count Basie.
Count Basie.
Lord Palmer.
B.B. King Band.
B.B. King, Cab Calloway.
Cab Calloway.
Roy Milton and his Solid Cinders.
The Ink Spots, Mills Brothers.
Roy Brown and his Mighty Mighty Men.
Al Hibbler, Lucky Millender.
Ella Fitzgerald, Addison Dean Sr.
Louis Jordan, Dinah Washington.
Ray Charles.
Billy Eckstein.
Little Richard, Etta James.
Oh, gee. So many bands, and I can't even remember how many.
This nightlife here was the greatest life.
And at night, I would crawl up to fire escapes and sit in there and peep in the window while they were playing. I was too young to go and I did that for years.
Place would be crowded, people coming in. We'd sneak in. You just mingle with the crowd. After a while, they forget all about you.
Being able to go there and be exposed to all those musicians, that was the height of our growing up.
For a young person, that kind of opened you up to things. Things you hear about that was happening in New York was happening right here. But whatever you were sad about when you got here in the music playing, that all be put to rest. Come in and have a good time.
That was a hell of a show, man.
I could care less about anything else.
And I remember they would come here to have what they call the Battle of the Bands. This band would play like 4 or 5 songs, this band come up and play 4 or 5 songs, then they rotate. Everybody had a good time.
This was a musician's hangout, this whole street, because there were a lot of venues where they could play.
We were on what you call the Chitlin Circuit.
It's where most of the black performers traveled. Here, Nashville, Beale Street in Memphis, Birmingham, they call it the Chitlin Circuit.
I have read about some of the events that took place here, and they had 700 people crowded into the space.
There was a vibrant kind of mentality down there that probably didn't exist anywhere in the white community, but it was the black culture that really made it into a real happening place to be.
A lot of this music is, very reflective of difficult times. But then on the other hand, a lot of this music is meant to celebrate their creativity. Its origins are in these predominantly African-American spaces.
9th Street was the mecca of the economy for black people, and Dreamland Ballroom was the vehicle that carried them.
World War II, and that brought about a dramatic revival. It, in some sense, rescued West 9th Street, because you had all the black servicemen at Camp Robinson, and they would come to West 9th Street for the cafes and the restaurants and the nightclubs, and the USO was in the Taborian Hall from 1942 onward. And the servicemen had money in their wallets. Suddenly, the number of vacancies on the street starts to diminish, and that was when the good times really rolled.
A young soldier in his 20s, naturally, he wants to come to 9th Street.
Lights were on, people are having a good time, everything is hustle, bustle, moving.
It was like a scene in a movie, but it was real.
At night, everything was hanging out on the street. Everything.
It was just a wild, swinging time.
You leave this place, you go to that place. Leave that place, you go to the next place.
It was an all-night thing. And then you slept all day, trying to get ready for the next night.
It has so many characters, it was unbelievable.
Popeye, Pistol Pete.
We call him Chicken.
Killer Pete.
The guy name was Payne.
Everybody called him Miss Bobby.
A little guy they called Fat. Fat used to run the pool hall. Was a guy named Black Mac. We called him Boo.
They called him Red.
He called himself Hard to Beat because he thought he was a great pool shooter, but he really couldn't shoot pool. I could beat him. It wasn't called Main Street, it was 9th Street, but for African Americans, it was Main Street.
It was our own town.
We couldn't go to the white restaurants. We couldn't go to the white hospitals, stay in the white hotels. We had nowhere else to go. We were segregated.
So it was 2 different cities into one. Little Rock had a rule, 9th Street had a rule. And everyone liked 9th Street rule better than the Little Rock rule.
So when you're out there in the world outside of that space, it can be a very cold place. You have to constantly monitor what you say, guard your actions, guard your interactions with other people. It can become incredibly stressful to have to do that.
But you came to 9th Street, all those things you couldn't do, you could do.
If it's just to go down and sit in a restaurant and have your favorite meal cooked the way you like it.
You can exhale. You can exhale on Friday night or Saturday night. You can find yourself again. You can be who you truly are when you are in a safe space.
The war tended to bring out the worst and the best of people. The line, West 9th Street, was the only place that African American soldiers could go. And then we had white policemen and white MPs that were, trying to keep the peace in this area as well. A lot of times you had the attitude, just because you're wearing a uniform doesn't mean you're equal to me.
And there was a lot of police brutality that took place. And there was a African-American soldier who was killed by a white policeman.
Sergeant Thomas Foster, he got into it with a white police officer, and the police officer shot him 5 times. It caused almost a riot on West 9th Street.
And this brought blacks together in a way that they had never been together.
Change is afoot, all right? Things are happening. People are challenging the system, and anytime anybody challenges the system, that's when you see people really enforcing those Jim Crow laws.
The realization that we are going to have this change, it is going to happen, was hard for a lot of Arkansans to take. Because even if you were the poorest Arkansan, and I hope I'm not offensive to anyone, they still thought of themselves as better than any African American. Do you understand that?
Just about all the machinery is original. This kind of equipment lasts your lifetime. It never wears out. You might replace a part or two, but it just keeps going. This is back when they were really building machinery. My dad owned his own shoe repair shop right behind our house in Jonesboro. He had a nickname. They called him Red Rogers. He was he was quite a fella. He was born and raised right here in Little Rock, just like myself. And the shoe business was his life. Well, he and my mother split up, separated, and he moved his location down on 9th Street, where the bulk of the black business was at the time. On a typical Saturday, it was real busy. His door opened every 30 seconds. That was a boom area, boom time. The money stayed in the neighborhood, and it flowed. It just flowed from one business to the next on 9th Street. It's like 9th Street was all interconnected at the time. Kept the community together. The community would have stayed together with the exception of the urban renewal. And that just kind of broke everything up and displaced them, all areas of town. When you separated like that, then you lost your power. You lose quite a bit, if not everything.
They really didn't expect that we were going to do it. And that's what I think is kind of fun, is that their expectation was that they were going to put all these obstacles and that we weren't going to do it.
The separate but equal was never equal. Integration was the way to go, and now the law supported that. As long as African Americans kind of kept to themselves and knew their place, things were okay. But when they started demanding their civil rights, which they were entitled to, that's when there was pushback from the larger white society.
Jim Crow South. Wow. Heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, demoralizing, destructive. And sometimes you have to have your heart broken to be mad enough to say, you broke my heart, but you haven't broken me.
By 1957, it's like Uncle Richard said, ain't gonna be like that. We done all got wiser. We had done the separation and we had tried to accommodate. It burst forth, social boil, that folks said, I'm equal to anybody. And I'm not gonna take second class, nothing. Education, jobs, movement. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I'm a people.
Jim Crow is starting to come to an end and break down at the same time that more geographical segregation is beginning to increase.
In Little Rock, well into the 1950s, in the central downtown neighborhoods, you still had whites and blacks living together on the same residential blocks. That started to change after school integration. And when that happened, sad but true, there was a conscious effort made by the Little Rock housing authorities and urban renewal to basically carry out a program of Negro removal, as it's come to be called.
At the beginning of 1959, alarmed at the threat of a decaying downtown area, the City Board of Directors authorized the Housing Authority to prepare and file an application with the Urban Renewal Administration for federal participation in the renewal of the entire downtown.
Well, when the City of Little Rock started to put into effect its slum clearance and urban renewal, it was supposedly a colorblind thing, but the big complaint very quickly came that slum clearance and urban renewal were not just about beautifying the city, but they were explicitly racial in their nature. The allegations are that, whole areas were flattened because they were African American rather than because they were blighted, and that a few blighted homes were used as an excuse to just kind of raise complete areas of African American residents.
Whole areas of, where you had integrated housing were demolished. New public housing projects were established, like the one at Granite Mountain, for example, in southeast Little Rock. But they were deliberately placed far away from white neighborhoods. There was a conscious effort to basically kind of segregate housing in the city.
And you see that in perfect intersection with the schools and the Brown v. Board of Education decision. The first thing that the school district does is to create new schools in areas which are clearly demarcated African American and white. It actually relabels Central High, tellingly, as Central High School. At the same time, they build Horace Mann High School in the east end of the city in a growing African American neighborhood, and they locate Hall High School in the extreme west of the city, right out in the white neighborhoods. So they provide basically two new segregated schools as a response to desegregation.
Why would you build a school far east of the city, which was Horace Mann, and then a white school far west? What kind of thinking is that?
Manipulation through public policy by giving an advantage to whites to get away from integration and desegregation. You left a group of folks who were left to be back segregated by housing patterns.
One of the things that urban renewal does is to build new public housing, which are nicer, which are more modern, and all those kinds of things, and use those, incentives as instruments to move the black population away from traditional areas of residence into new areas of residence. There's all kinds of ways of manipulating things once you kind of break up the natural housing patterns.
Not only the housing changed, the marketplace changed. Not only the marketplace changed, the schools changed. Not only the schools changed, the ownership was changing. And that was determined by what I call the engines of institutional racism.
People were aware of it at the time. People in African-American neighborhoods and white neighborhoods were aware of what was going on, but there's not much you can do about it. Little Rock's known throughout the United States as being at the forefront of urban renewal and being very successful in getting that federal money to come into the city. Because there's millions of dollars at stake here, and millions of dollars of federal money on the table to bring to your city to help create better homes. West 9th Street was based a lot on those neighborhoods that surrounded it, particularly Dunbar. Connected at the end with Philander Smith College, one of the key benchmark institutions in that community. If you get those neighborhoods around West 9th Street, then basically you take out all of its clientele and all of the people who use it on a regular basis. So slum clearance and urban renewal certainly doesn't help West 9th Street in any way.
That impacted the businesses that relied upon these dollars to flow down to 9th Street in a very negative way. You have to make money. The Dreamland Ballroom closed its doors in '59, and immediately another club went in here, but it didn't last. They were gone by '65.
These decisions have been made about these communities, but the people who live there have not been sitting at the table along with the decision makers. And once things start rolling, it's often incredibly difficult to stop it. So your entire community is gone in one sweep, and all you're left with are memories.
Then, in addition, example of really horrendous public policy, the Little Rock Housing Authority in the state of Arkansas collaborated in building the East-West Expressway, what became eventually Interstate 630.
You know, one of the things that the I-630 does is it drives a big concrete wedge between West 9th Street and Philander Smith College and the Dunbar neighborhood that's behind it. So it really hardens the lines of what's going on with urban renewal.
The urban renewal efforts and the building of the interstate system put people in cars, gave them access to suburban land, and suburban America began to grow and develop in a remarkable way in the late 50s and 60s. And we now have the physical makeup of a city like Little Rock, vastly different than 1950.
We see a white flight out of central Little Rock moving to more of the suburban areas.
So the I-630 is really a kind of suburban expressway as it becomes to get people from particularly West Little Rock suburban neighborhoods to downtown where they work.
Now you're moving into the downtown area. That you have a problem there, don't you?
Yes, the downtown area is a real problem, Jim. The problem there, of course, is right-of-way. The Housing Authority is acquiring much of the right-of-way through the High Street project, which is from Broadway to Bishop, and then, of course, you still have the construction costs and the scheduling of the construction by the Highway Department. The plans have been pretty well completed, and if we had the right-of-way, they could move right ahead on it, depending, of course, on the matching money from the federal government.
And that freeway phenomenon called urban renewal or whatever is consistent across the country. And I can't see that there isn't some intent when it happened everywhere.
They did exactly what they wanted to do, was to destroy a black community. Because see, they lied to those black entrepreneurs that were on 9th Street when they told them, we're gonna build a freeway and it's gonna come directly down 9th Street. Some of them said, well, I might as well take my business elsewhere, you know. And those that didn't, they threatened them with eminent domain.
Well, they was gonna tear all this out. This was gonna be the throughway. It was gonna take over all of this. It wasn't gonna be any more 9th Street. But as you can see, their freeway is over there. Part of 9th Street is still here. And you had places that should have been kept and saved on this street. But it did not happen. See, 9th Street became a place of blight. Glass, boarded up buildings, and it became a place that you would really be sick to see it.
And as fast as those people moved out of those buildings, they started tearing them down. One by one, they started tearing them down.
You know, I don't think anybody ever even dreamed of 9th Street ever going down. We didn't even think about that. Thought it would always be there.
I'll never understand that. Why? It was designed to destroy that. It had to be.
It's gone, and all the people who were connected with it laid to rest. That's history.
You know, when they tore down these structures, they just cleared it off, surface cleared. They didn't dig down into it. There might have been basements that are just covered in. You never know. So that would take an effort, I think, that needs to occur to really identify the sort of the hidden parts of this street. These sidewalks are original, wide sidewalks, or as they were in 1950, 1960, or even before. This is more than likely added. This was a saw cut, and they placed this plaque embedded in concrete at that location. It means Arkansas Highway Department right-of-way. So this is how they determined the boundaries. This is what they used probably to survey the new expressway that came through the town. So these are just other symbols of the street that has historic value, I think. If there was not an I-630, if there was not an urban renewal, you would have had really historic buildings that would have created a situation that might be similar to Beale Street in Memphis. There may have been more restaurants, more places to attract people, more from an entertainment standpoint. It would have been a plus for the city of Little Rock to have a district, a distinctive district. You had the Mosaic Temples on one end of 9th Street, you had the Taborian Hall on the other end. So you had traffic, you had circulation going between these two anchors, the anchors of 9th Street. The land is still here, the street is still here. The opportunity to build back this street in a manner that would be consistent with the historic character, it's still possible. So I would assume that the goal would be, let's fill in the blank. Let's fill in the space between the anchors.
In 1988, the city of Little Rock announced it was planning to demolish buildings all along West 9th Street. The Arkansas Historic Preservation Office basically did get the city to agree not to demolish the Taborian Hall. Later in the early 1990s, it was sold to Carrie McCoy, who really began a major renovation, restoration of the building.
She bought this building, which was supposed to be demolished because it became a desert of utility, what used to be there.
I don't know. Just when I first saw it, I was just in love with it. I came in that front door, which I have a picture of. I came in the front door and there was debris from the front door all the way back. The debris was literally a foot deep. I tried to come in a couple of times and didn't get there, and after about the second or third time, I found a path to the third floor. It was kind of a tunnel. And when I came out and turned around and looked at the ballroom, it was just beautiful. I cannot tell you how beautiful it looked. I cannot believe that I'm crying over it. It was like a spiritual experience, seriously. It is a moment in time, and it has seen so much, and you can feel it. You absolutely can feel it.
Right here where we're sitting, so many stars participated right here. And there were enough people to keep this going.
She bought it, and she had a vision of what it can be. And as a result of that, she brought back, through the history of the past, a renaissance of what used to be in that building.
I don't want to change it. I don't want to take it back to its original grandeur. I want it to be exactly like it is, with its chipping paint, with its walls that can talk, with its box seats that aren't perfect, with its balcony that's not perfect, with its floors that aren't perfect, with its ceiling that's not perfect. I want to save it. I'm spending my energy on it. And so the mission is, let's save it.
All this should have been a part of history. Just like she's revitalizing this building, she being Carrie. It took a lot of effort, time, and money to come and redo this, to keep history alive.
This building is intrinsically important to Arkansas history and to all of us.
This is a part of the American story. I mean, we need to know about these communities. We need to understand that the communities were complex, that people were educated, that people had money, that people owned businesses, that they established and maintained important institutions in these communities. These are stories that people aren't getting.
Really, if we don't understand how we got to where we are today, we can't really have any sense of the mistakes we made, the things that we got right, in trying to forge a policy for moving forward to the future.
The whole community did this to these people, so the whole community has some responsibility, it seems to me, through social policies to try to redress these ancient wrongs.
I think many of us wish we could, go back and play out this story a very different way, yes, but the story's been played out the way it is, and now it's thinking about how do we overcome the division that folks a couple of generations ago helped to create for us.
We are still 3 steps behind everybody. The Black community is. And most of it is our fault. It's our fault. We hold each other back.
I want to have community and family, and I want to love on one another, and we don't have that togetherness anymore. And I'm not sure what we can do about coming back together as a community.
If they could do it then, going through all of what they went through, with so little, and today we have so much, and we can't even come together. It's hurtful. It's hurtful, man. It's hurtful.
9th Street sticks in your mind. Freedom again, that sense of freedom. I go out there now and stand on that corner and think about how it was 60 years ago. It was great. The things you could do on 9th Street should have never been ceased. It should be alive and well right today. Yeah, what's gone now is sad. It's sad what's gone and what it is now, just one building sitting here. And this one building brings back the memories of thousands and thousands of people, this one building. This is the memory right here. This is the hub of 9th Street.
You can have everything there now again that once was there if you learn to appreciate it and try to help people to bridge that gap of then and now, and they'll be so that they'll get a little appreciation for it. Once you taste it, you may like it. Got it?
Them that God shall have, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is news. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Yes, the strong get smart while the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't ever make the grave. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own.
Major funding provided by the Arkansas Humanities Council and the Moving Image Trust Fund.